This year we obviously saw the Sustainable Development Goals agreed to at the UN. And the thing which people need to understand about these goals is no matter how good they are, no matter how wonderful the targets are, without a movement of people behind them that understand these goals, without a movement of people behind them that is willing to hold their leaders accountable to the promises the leaders have made, then the goals aren't going to be met. So for us, what was critical with the launch of these goals is that we ensured that as many people as possible knew about them, understood them, and wanted to act on them. The Millennium Development Goals, when they were launched in 2000, were largely launched to not that much fanfare at all. To be honest, it wasn't until 2005 that people really started talking about them and understanding the obligations they imposed. And that was 5 years we missed. So we think a movement that understands the goals is going to be critical, and that's what we've devoted a lot of time and effort to. Global Citizen Festival, was broadcast in over 160 countries around the world, seen by millions, but that's only the start. Now we need to build on that and take it forward, because if we don't, no matter how much money we throw at them, the goals won't be met. So the actions that we try and promote are very concrete actions. And really, you got to ask yourself, what is the difference between merely raising awareness about something as opposed to really pushing a key policy agenda along? And so with our actions, we always try and get those which are going to be targeted and actually driven towards producing an outcome. Whether it's emailing a local member of parliament about an issue, tweeting a world leader, signing a petition, or picking up the phone to the foreign minister's office because you believe there's a particular issue that should be on her agenda. So they're the actions that we try and push members to take, but over time we want global citizens to go even deeper in their engagement on the issues. We want people writing handwritten letters. We want people rocking up and knocking on their members of parliament's doors. We want them meeting face to face with key decision makers and telling them why they are so passionate about these issues, because ultimately it's people that change people, and we want to try and facilitate that and encourage that as much as possible. At the end of the day, there's some amazing experts in the world. And what experts are great at doing is they're fantastic at being able to identify the solution to a problem. So they'll be great at saying, well, what do we need to do to change this? But often, the experts that know what must be done actually aren't always the best at knowing how to get it done, as in how do you take this great policy solution and turn it into reality. And often the people who know how to do that may not even necessarily have an interest or even background in the subject matter there. So actually bringing together diverse people, going beyond the doctors, going beyond the lawyers, the experts, and bringing together a diverse group, I think is going to be critical to achieving the goals and many of these targets, no matter what they are, to bring together a diversity of skills and get them involved. In order to be an effective advocate, and anyone I think can be an effective advocate, but I think to do so you need to understand two things ultimately. The first thing is understanding narrative. Why are you so passionate about this issue? Because if you can't articulate that, then it's very hard to convince someone to get behind you. Ultimately, effective advocacy is based on relationships of trust, and to get people to trust you, to get people to follow you, they want to know why you're doing this. They want to say, well, hold on a sec. Why are you interested in a world free of polio, a world free of poverty, or a world where every girl has access to education? What does it mean to you? So the first piece of advice I would have to anyone wanting to be an advocate is understand why this is passionate to you and learn how to communicate that, because that's going to be critical in terms of engaging people and rallying them to you. Second aspect that an advocate needs to understand, or a budding advocate should understand, is what is the theory of change? And what we're really saying there is, what actually does success look like, and how can we achieve that, and what are, the levers of power we need to pull on in order to achieve that. So if you take the example of polio eradication, which I've worked on, yes, to get a polio-free world, we need the doctors, we need the vaccines, but we also need the money to pay for all of that. Well, okay, how can we get that money? Well, governments can do that. Well, okay, who do governments respond to? They respond to their citizens. Well, okay, we need citizens writing into politicians asking for the funds in order to get the job done in terms of eradicating polio. So 2 things, narrative, theory of change. Get those right and you're well on your way to running an effective campaign. You know, a lot of people can criticize the goals for being too broad. They can say it brings in 17 goals, 169 targets. But the reality is that there is something special in all of those targets and goals that now that they've been agreed to, no one can take away from them. And that is they've all been rubber stamped and agreed to at the highest levels. Every single member state of the United Nations has said, we're going to adopt these goals. And there are some fantastic goals and targets within them. Things like ending preventable child deaths, you know, so you don't have the ridiculous situation where a resource-rich country like Nigeria still has 1 in every 8 child that dies before the age of 5, or the 62 million girls that don't get an education. There's actually targets saying that they are entitled to it. What I would advise people is embrace these goals, get behind them, and actually the goals and targets that are going to succeed are going to be those where the advocates get behind it, they channel political and financial will behind it and really elevate it and make it a priority. So my advice now is the goals are there, they're a gift to anyone and they cover all the issues, and if you're passionate about water and sanitation, education, health, then get behind that and champion it and say, okay, now it's time to implement this. And we've got a good precursor, the Millennium Development Goals, goals 4 and 5, you know, that dealt with child and maternal health. You know, we saw them succeed because they provided a conduit for millions of people to get behind it, and you had this global reduction in child and maternal mortality, largely as a result of these goals and people getting behind it. And so there's a model for us to use when we look at the new Sustainable Development Goals. I think if you're a campaigner, it's probably in your job description that one must be an optimist, because if you weren't an optimist, then you wouldn't really make a good campaigner. In fact, it's often said that too often us as advocates, we look at what decision makers are going to do and we try and predict what they're going to do and try and react to that, rather than imagining what the future should or ought to be like and trying to work towards that. So I'm naturally optimistic. Having said that, there are big challenges ahead of us. I don't just think in terms of planetary boundaries. I think if we look at the geopolitical structure of the world, I think never before in the last 100 years, in fact greater than that, not since before the First World War have we lived in a situation where geopolitically we live in so uncertain times, unpredictable times. And it's going to take a lot of changing attitudes and behavior to navigate through all these issues. And that's why I believe we really do need a movement of global citizens that understand that what happens in one part of the world can affect us here, that have empathy for those beyond our borders. And if we can do that, a truly politically salient movement of global citizens around the world, then just maybe we can overcome a lot of these challenges. So I'm optimistic, but I don't deny the fact it's going to be hard work.